Hello, friends. This is Dave Hurwitz, executive editor at ClassicsToday.com, here with an interesting discussion, at least I hope you find it interesting, I do, called If the Tunes Are Great, Form Doesn't Matter. And we have 10 case studies, each of which address this issue from a slightly different angle. Now, as some of you may know, I am a form whore. I love musical form. I drool over musical form. It's fascinating. The idea that something which is as intangible as a piece of music has an autonomous structure which you can grasp and put in your brain and turn around and look at from different angles. And oh my God, that's fascinating, isn't it? I mean, it's a real study in the psychology of music and our perception of things and all kinds of interesting topics like that. But what really concerns me is this question. If a composer has gorgeous musical material, fabulous musical material, how well does that carry over any perceived peculiarities or defects in the way that he arranges that material and the structure of the work? And the reason that's so interesting for me, actually, is because musicology, the science of musicology, musical analysis, has never been able to explain why a tune does what it does, why it's effective, why it works, why it evokes emotion or feeling. All they can do is analyze the thing harmonically or in phrasing or rhythm or style. They can tell you about it, but they can't tell you the why. I mean, it's just like in physics where we have all the little particles and things. We know what they are, we know how they interact, but no one knows why they do what they do or has the values that they do or, why the universe was created that way. Well, somehow music gets at that basic question because we can explain everything about the melody except why it's a great melody, why people love it, why it hits us the way we do, the way it does. So here are some examples of works that are either formally defective or formally very curious or sui generis, but that have unbelievable tunes. And the tunes are what make the work and keep it in the repertoire. First, Tchaikovsky, the Manfred Symphony, of course. Actually, the Manfred Symphony begins with one of the ugliest tunes Tchaikovsky ever wrote. It actually represents the character of Manfred, who is glum and miserable. But along the way, he encounters gorgeous tunes, whether he's wandering in the Alps or meeting the fairy of the Alps or a pastoral scene or the orgy at the end. Formally, the piece is a complete mess. I mean, there's no reason why one episode succeeds another, or it's even a symphony in 4 tableaux or movements or whatever it is. I mean, it's just the finale, it does nothing and goes nowhere. And oh my God, it's gorgeous. I love every single minute of it. But it is one of those pieces that, because it's so formally peculiar, has been subject to cuts and rearrangements and reorchestrations, and people don't leave it alone. And none of those are improvements. That's the fascinating thing about it. You can mangle it all you want, but the fact of the matter is the only way it really works is the way Tchaikovsky wrote it, and you have to play the living daylights out of it, and the tunes are wonderful. Absolutely wonderful. And that's what keeps it going. So next, Schumann's Rhenish Symphony. Now, Schumann was famous for his non-developing development sections. By the time Schumann got his hands on what was becoming sonata form, he was already starting to become kind of a stiff thing that people did more by rote than by inspiration, unless you were somebody like Brahms or something like that. But Schumann's Rhenish Symphony has the most non-developing first movement you've ever heard in your life. But it has so much energy. It's just so energetic. And how does he get around the fact that first movement, and the finale also goes nowhere? That's a whole other issue. But the first movement particularly, what a formal mess. And it's fascinating because it just seems to go round and round and round and round. And in the development section, you have that da 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 da. Da 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 da. What do I do next? Da 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 da. Da da da. Bum bum. Bum bum. Oh, let's try the second subject. That doesn't work. So let's start at the beginning. It could be stuck there forever, except that at one point, finally, that horn call comes in based on the first subject and shows him the way out of the blind alley into which he's worked himself. It's really fun. And what really keeps the thing moving is just the incredible amount of energy that Schumann builds into it. It just keeps chugging along. It seems to have an inexhaustible supply of futility, which is going to drive us all crazy until he manages to get to the end. So he does it. He does it because the thematic material is marvelous. And that horn call, oh my goodness, the horn call, it's thrilling. It's absolutely thrilling. So, if you've got something thrilling, it really doesn't matter how messed up you were before you got to the thrilling thing, does it? All is forgiven as soon as we hear the horn call. After Schumann, well, Dvořák, the Dumky trio. Now, this is a piece that isn't formally defective in any way. It's formally perfect. It's just that nobody knows why. I mean, it makes no sense at all when you think about it. It's got 6 dumkas, and a dumka is a tune that alternates deep melancholy with schizophrenic high spirits. And that's all it does. It does one thing, then it does the other thing, then it does one thing, then it does the other thing, and then it stops. And he has 6 of them in a row, so they all have basically the same form. And he does suggest that the first 3 of them or 4 of them should be played attacca together, like some sort of giant first movement or something. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, you just got basically 6 identically primitive dance forms, one after the other. And the piece is a knockout. It's absolutely a knockout. Holds together beautifully. It's perfectly proportioned. It doesn't have a stray note anywhere. There is nothing that you could suggest that could be changed. And the tunes are to die for. And that's the role that the tunes play in making us completely forget the formal simplicity of it all, the basicness, the repetitiveness of the formal structure, because every single tune is a ravishing jewel all by itself that completely makes us forget how they're being arranged. You just listen to them and you wallow in them. They're gorgeous. That's one of those pieces. I think it's one of the greatest pieces ever written for sticking it to, musical analysis. Because how do you analyze a piece like that? You can't. You can't. It just is. It does what it does. It's a primal being of musical substance. So that's, where a piece that has no formal issues at all. It just has a unique formal approach. After Dvořák, Strauss, Ein Heldenleben. Oh my God. Well, Strauss is a composer who, as you know, had just a dreadful sense of timing. Everything he wrote goes on 10 minutes longer than it has any right to, even his operas. The operas are famous. You get through the plot and then the singing starts, just when you want to go home, when the story is over. You've got, Salome sitting there with the head for 15 minutes, the trio and Rosenkavalier, after everything's all said and done, they just stand around and say, Die Frauen Schatten, good grief. I mean, all the folderol that goes on there with the, magic things and the guy turning to stone and people flying around and the evil magic nurse and the earth swallowing up Barak the dyer and his wife and, the fountain of doom and then Kaikobad running around. All that nonsense is going on. And then finally, after all that gets resolved, they all just stand at the front of the stage for 15 minutes and have a nice little sing. Well, Ein Heldenleben is like that, isn't it? And the reason is because it's based on a defective version of sonata form. You have the exposition, which has 3 elements. You've got the hero, then you've got the critics, which is sort of the second subject, and you've got a third subject, the girlfriend. After that, you have a double development section, really a triple development section, but it's a double development section where you have the love scene and then the battle with the critics. So they all get mixed up and they all develop in nice Germanic fashion. They're being very Germanically developed by being manipulated in various ways. And then after the defeat, we have the recapitulation where the hero comes back and it's all glorious. And then, well, what is Strauss going to do? You have the critics are gone. Well, not quite, because they sort of pop up a little bit. And the girlfriend pops up a little bit at the end there. But then there's like 20 more minutes of stuff. The hero's works of peace, the hero's renunciation of the universe, the blah, 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 blah. He dies with his girlfriend next to him. I mean, it's all completely unnecessary. And it dissolves the basic formal shapeliness that Strauss had going. Because whereas you could argue after the development section that the earlier stuff was all motivated by the fact that it's going to be developed, once he recapitulates, there's no reason for anything. It's all completely and entirely unmotivated, and it just lays there. And now, you can disguise that with a really dynamic performance, as, for example, Fritz Reiner does. But there is no mistaking the formal dysfunction of the work as a whole. However, the melodic material, the thematic material, is incredibly compelling. And that may just get us over the hump. Strauss may have realized that because in the Hero's Works of Peace section, he quotes his own greatest hits, including the big horn call from Don Juan, do da 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 da. Yeah, he's doing everything he can to maintain the melodic interest. Does he succeed? Really depends on the performance, doesn't it? Next, Ravel, Boléro. This is the iconic example. If you have a great tune, nothing else matters, because what does Ravel do? He just repeats it. That's it. Even he said that the piece consisted of 15 minutes of orchestration without music, because it was so non-developmental. It was a radical work when it was written. It caused a riot. People got hysterical. I mean, it was a whole thing. But here you have it, an amazing tune that gets under your skin. And, just through sheer repetition, there is form, of course. The form is sheer repetition and the increasing use of orchestral color. And that's another aspect that musical analysis is impossible to quantify in any particular way. To what degree does color, texture, orchestral color, instrumental timbre contribute to our understanding or perception of form? Because essentially, Boléro really is a theme and variations. The theme doesn't change, only its timbre changes. But it works. It works fabulously well because of the way Ravel handles those changes in timbre to sustain the music's interest and its length. It's a wonderful piece to argue about when it comes to questions of form. It really is. And after Ravel, Rachmaninoff, Symphony No. 2. This is an interesting case because it has the tunes, gorgeous tunes, especially the slow movement. And the second subject in the scherzo, oh my God. Da, 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 da. It's just so beautiful. But Rachmaninoff himself sanctioned enormous cuts. It's like he didn't give a damn about the form at all. The basic form of the work is very academic. It's academic sonata form. The first movement even has like an exposition repeat. Goodness gracious, what do you want that for? But cutting it doesn't help it. It makes it shorter. That's the whole point, right? You get to hear the tunes like once instead of twice or three times. But what's amazing is that when you put it all back and do it in its entirety without cuts, the form doesn't matter that way either, really. Not really. The tunes all work, and sometimes you don't even know where the cuts were. I remember the first time I heard the complete version versus, Eugene Ormandy's classic recording, which was tremendously cut. The scherzo gets cut virtually in half. The slow movement has a third of it missing. It was a long time before I figured out where the cuts were. In the development section of the first movement, they're seamless. You can go from, the whole chunk get left out. You'd never notice. But when it's put back, it's lovely. You don't mind that it's there. Yeah, it's longer, okay, but it's not like the music is not sustaining itself. It's not full of dead spots. It's just maybe not necessary. That's the question. Does it work both ways equally well? I wonder. I really wonder. I mean, I tend to prefer the complete version, but when I hear the cut version, it's like, okay, I get out 20 minutes earlier. Not so bad if you're in a rush. So that's Rachmaninoff. Then we have Holst, the planets. Well, it's kind of hard to figure out what the form of the planets is anyway, isn't it? I mean, it's got it's how many, 7 movements or so? Yeah, it's got 7 movements, and they are all each based on a planet. They're little tone poems. They're delightful. But Holst hated the piece because it became so popular, and he thought that he'd written much better music. And his daughter, Imogen, in her book about Holst, oh my God, she was brutal, absolutely brutal. She said the worst movement was Jupiter. Well, Jupiter's fantastic. Everyone loves Jupiter. It's got the big tune in the middle. It's the most successful of all the movements. Of course, she didn't think so. She thought probably the most successful was like Mercury or one of the ones nobody cares about because it was musically more intriguing or rhythmically more interesting, whereas Jupiter is just a bunch of terrific tunes, one after the other with a whopper in the middle. And she just trashed the thing, trashed it, because she said it was formally clumsy, and I don't know what that means. I truly don't. I mean, the first time I heard Jupiter, I thought it was dazzling, and so does everybody else, because the tunes carry it along, and how they're arranged doesn't really matter so much. Also, another interesting case in point, Bizet, Symphony in C. Oh, what a wonderful work that is, isn't it? It's just the most beautifully tuneful, perky little symphony anybody ever conceived of. It is entirely formalistic in the way that it's organized. It's a student work. Bizet is just pouring new wine into old bottles. Everything. It has all the regular exposition repeats. In fact, most of the time it gets performed, people don't bother with the repeats because they're just so unnecessary. They're totally unmotivated. He's just doing what the form is supposed to be, as he understood it in the Paris Conservatoire of the day. But again, the tunes, holy mackerel. I could listen to it with 20 exposition repeats. I wouldn't care because those tunes are so beautiful. I mean, the slow movement too, particularly with that oboe solo and the drone bass and the trio of the scherzo and that delicious finale. Da 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 ba da ba 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 da dum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum bum ba da dum. It's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. It just carries you along, bubbling away, and you don't even care that maybe the form, the shape of it is a little bit stiff, and it can be unduly repetitious and harmonically maybe a little not as interesting as it could be. I don't know. It just works. It works for me. And let's see, almost at the end, Gershwin, Rhapsody in Blue. Everyone trashes Rhapsody in Blue formally. Well, first of all, it's a rhapsody. I mean, rhapsodies are free. You don't have to have a rhapsody that has a specific form. There's no rhapsody form, like there is sonata form, But even beyond that, it's been described simply as a chain of tunes arranged in a more or less random fashion. Oh, but what tunes they are. Even so, it was very rare for many, many, many years to hear the complete Rhapsody in Blue. It was often cut, and I've never understood why, because again, if a tune is great, you could repeat it a million times. Constant Lambert always said the problem with folk song, using folk song in a symphonic context, is the only thing you could do with a folk song is play it louder. You can't develop it in any way because that destroys its essential character. Well, Gershwin's tunes are like that. They're like the primeval melodic substance of music. And so, yes, all he does is alternate and repeat them in various ways, with the piano, without the piano, with a saxophone and a different rhythm, a different tempo. And then there's the gorgeous tune in the middle. And it makes no difference at all because those tunes are absolutely imperishable. You cannot get enough of them. I mean, yes, if the piece were 4.5 hours long, probably you'd have enough of them. But whether it's 16 minutes or 14 minutes or 12 minutes, does it make any difference at all? I mean, you could take another repetition. Why? Because the melodic material itself is ravishing. and ravissant. That's the point. And last but not least, oh, this is a biggie. Rimsky-Korsakov's Russian Easter Overture. That gets my vote for the most dysfunctional piece of great music ever written. I do not understand why it does anything that it does. The introduction goes on way too long. It comes back several times. It's way too long. The episodes repeat themselves for no particular reason. You know, the little bell thing, chong, 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 da 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 da. It stops, it starts, it stops again, it starts again. By the time we get to the end, you're like, oh, sheesh, thank God. I thought that was never coming. But the thing is, again, the themes are so beautiful. And, you know, yeah, okay, so we have to have another solo violin cadenza. The harp has to do its thing. You know, tinkly glockenspiel and percussion hoogies, having the trombones do the recitative. I mean, it's endless. It's circular. It just goes in a circular form, and you have no idea where you are in it or when it's going to end or why it's going to end until it finally does. And then it's glorious. I mean, that final peroration with the bells going crazy and the tam-tam on the bottom and the trombones honking out that Orthodox chant. Gosh, it's marvelous. I love the work. I love it to death. It's one of my compulsive collecting works, and I may do a video about that too, although I compulsively collect just about everything by Rimsky-Korsakov, just because he's a wonderful example of how a composer with a terrible sense of timing. He's like the Russian Richard Strauss. Everything goes on 5 minutes longer than it has to, and everything has to end quietly, just except the Russian Easter Overture. No, seriously, it's a fabulous example of fabulous tunes, glittering orchestration, amazing timbral sensitivity, and it's just formal chaos. He's just arranging it the most rote possible way, but changing the orchestration and the sound and all that stuff every time it comes back, and so it doesn't get dull. I do have, in a bad performance, you can make the piece sound much weaker than it really is because the timbre is so important, because the sound is so important, and timing is important too. You can't let it lay there and drop dead because it doesn't have any self-generating form. It's just a series of musical objects placed in a certain order. But when you do it well, who cares about form? I mean, I make a lot of exceptions when I can really hear the percussion parts in that final peroration. It justifies a heck of a lot of waiting until you get there, doesn't it? I mean, it really does. So there you have it, my friends. 10 remarkable works, examples of the adage, if the tunes are great, form doesn't matter. Maybe you have some suggestions for works that are formally just a mess, but the tunes carry them along anyway. I'd be curious to see what your opinion is, too, about this, because it's very, very, I think, interesting topic, and it really kind of gets to the essence of what music is and how it works and how it affects us. And I think that we can never exhaust that particular area of inquiry. So keep on listening, friends. Thanks so much for joining me. Take care.